Sellers. I'm the weed specialist here at the Research Center. Been here for 9 years already. And you'll notice that my title has something to do with smutgrass management over the past 70 years. I'm not that old, obviously, but smutgrass, is a lot older than I am. Been here a lot longer than I've been here, but I've sure learned a lot about it over the past 8 or 9 years that I've been dealing with it. So, first, I'll just tell you, do you see where the dog funnel has popped up right out here, right behind me? Can you see that? Okay. We sprayed that last year with 2 quarts of Baelfire to the acre, just one little block. And I anticipated using it as a demonstration plot last fall for my field day, but I chose not to because I wanted to compare it to something else, and I never got that accomplished before the field day. So, what happens? We control the smutgrass, we get another weed in place of it because we killed something. Then there's a void in the pasture until that Baelfire grass fills back in, another weed comes in. So luckily dog fennel is much cheaper to control and much easier to control than smutgrass is. Okay, so that's the first thing. All right, so we've been dealing with this since the 1950s. Obviously I haven't, but my predecessors have. Dr. Hodges, that we introduced earlier today, was one of the first people that worked on smutgrass management in Florida. So there's some data on page 23, I believe, in your book that shows the effect of repeated mowing on smutgrass density. And basically what it tells you is you can mow it as much as you want to, it's still going to be there, and it's probably going to increase over time. The only thing mowing does do is it decreases the clump size. So instead of the clumps being 12 to 14, sometimes 16 inches in diameter, now you're down 3, 4, maybe 6 inches. So it does decrease clump size. So that's the one good thing that mowing will do. The bad thing about mowing is it'll help spread seed. Now, does anybody know how many seeds smutgrass produces per year? You think hundreds? Thousands? Thousands. They're much more prolific weed species than smutgrass is, but it does produce 45,000 seeds per plant on average. Okay? So, think about that. 10 plants in 1 acre will get you 450,000 seeds spread on that 1 acre. Now, obviously, these seeds are very small, so they can travel by wind because they are so small. So they're actually dispersing themselves over a much wider area than 1 acre. Okay? So we've done some work on seed germination because if we can figure out, is there a certain pH that this smutgrass doesn't like to germinate at, or something like that is an environmental stress, can we somehow manage seed germination in our pastures? And the quick answer to that is pretty much no. But we did find out that giant smutgrass prefers to germinate under very hot, very humid, and very wet conditions. Conversely, small smutgrass, which is actually one of the species I have behind me, I don't have much giant out here, it likes dry or cooler but wet conditions. So what we've kind of surmised, and we don't really have any evidence other than empirical, is that giant smutgrass has taken over in South Florida because it germinates in the summer when we're nice and hot and nice and humid. And small smutgrass has kind of taken a back seat because it prefers to germinate in our winter time period when we might have some moisture. Okay? So giant smutgrass has taken advantage of our environment and has come in and is invaded because of that. Okay, so we talked about mowing. Let's talk about burning a little bit. Dr. Lancaster, Dr. Sarah, I should say, talked a little bit about burning cogon grass this morning, very briefly, and discussed the protein levels in cogon grass after a burn. We find the same thing in Baelfire grass. And we find that the cattle will actually graze it for 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks after a burn. And the protein, the crude protein of smutgrass during that time period is actually pretty good. It's just as good as Baelfire grass, if not a little bit better. So it does have that effect. Okay? So there's been a couple studies that have been done of one back in the late 90s and another one more recently up at Deseret Ranch, where they looked at burning and mob grazing, okay, as a management tactic for smutgrass. And I'll just briefly summarize that data. And you're going to see a recurring theme as I go through this talk. If you stop the management practice, smutgrass returns to its original density. So if you stop the management practice, smutgrass returns to its original density. And that's basically what happened, or is happening currently with the current mob grazing study. Another thing we looked at only in a greenhouse setting, because it's much harder to manipulate soil pH in the field, we looked at giant and small smutgrass competition at pH levels 4.5, 5.5, which is the optimum pH for Bahia grass growth, and 6.5. So we wanted to see, is there a level of soil pH where the smutgrass species will become less competitive than Bahia grass? And basically what we found, if you look on page, must be 24 or 25, 24, this figure right here, basically what it shows you is that once you start ramping up the soil pH to more favorable nutrient uptake for the Bahia grass, the giant smutgrass and the small smutgrass like it just as well, and actually will outperform the Bahia grass at that level. Okay, so soil pH by itself isn't going to help very much, other than increase your nutrient uptake of your Bahia grass. Okay. So one of the things we looked at over the past few years has been a multi-year approach. As I said, if you stop the management practice, it's going to return to its original density. So I started looking at the multi-year approach, spraying Baelfire at a full rate or reduced rates, and following that up a second year with either full rate or reduced rates. And we're seeing some pretty promising results. We did that in very small plots initially. I have another study on the neighbor's property looking at this on a much larger scale. But the data from that is looking actually pretty promising. And if you look at page 26 in table 1, it shows you exactly what we did. We went out in the first year with 0 to 1 pound, which would be up to 2 quarts per acre, and followed that the second year with a ½ pound. I don't have all the data included here, but it shows you that a ½ pound followed by a ½ pound, you ended up with 1 plant per plot. If you compare it to a single full pound in 1 year, it's 1.5 plants per plot. So you see the same results just with a 2-year approach. Now, why is that important? Anybody want to guess why a 2-year approach might be better? I'm talking about Baelfire. How many people have experience with Baelfire or hexazinone? Okay, have you ever had it fail? I see head shaking, yes. Okay. All right. Why has it failed?
Too dry.
Too dry? And? No rain or? Wrong time of year?
Plant's not growing.
Plant's not growing? These are all good answers. But you can also have too much rain. Okay? I said this at my field day last year, I used to brag that I never had a failure with Baelfire on smutgrass control because I always sprayed in July. Well, I missed my July application 1 year, sprayed in August, got 10 inches of rain within a week. It was washed out of the root zone. I never got any control that year. Okay? That was at full rate, full 2 quarts per acre. All right, so what's the going price for 2 quarts of Baelfire per acre? Anyone want to guess?
$35 or $40.
$35 or $40. It's right on. Okay? So, if you're applying a full rate and you go out and get a failure, you just lost $35 to $40 an acre. That adds up quick. So my thought was, well, I know that there's some variability in the level of control we can get with the 1 quart rate but it will help us spread our risk out over a couple years. So if we get a complete failure, you're only out half the money versus the full amount. And as long as I have sprayed in July, in that middle to the end of the July time period, I've been pretty successful with the 1 quart rate. I haven't looked at it enough in the August to September time frame to really feel comfortable with that because of the variation in rainfall that we get. Okay? All right, a couple other studies we looked at real quick. We also looked at burning followed by herbicide application versus complete renovation versus fall roller chopping and overseeding with ryegrass. Okay? If you burn or don't burn, the results are the same. It doesn't matter whether you burn or not. The main thing is to spray the Baelfire or the hexazinone during the rainy season. That's the biggest thing. What was interesting about the pastures that we completely renovated was that the number of smutgrass plants in those plots exploded the following year. I probably had 10 to 50 plants per square yard. So the number of seedling smutgrass plants that were out there was pretty amazing. We followed that with a half rate, so 1 quart per acre rate of Baelfire, and we completely cleaned it up. Greater than 90% control, and it was very comparable to our just a full rate application the year before. The fall roller chopping followed by overseeding and ryegrass. Does anybody want to guess what happened there? No guesses? I actually decreased the smutgrass population a year after. It kind of surprised me. But I think just for roller chopping, raised some of those clumps out of the ground. They actually died, and we didn't get that much smutgrass emergence as we did in the completely renovated plots. But we also followed that treatment up with a half rate and ended up with similar levels of control as we did in the completely renovated plots. Okay? So, you know, Baelfire is the only herbicide we have for smutgrass control. There used to be another one called Dalpon that they used for many years. It's no longer on the market. It's not going to come back. The use rate is too high, and the injury level is actually higher than what we get with Baelfire on our desirable grass. So, with that in mind, I'm just going to say the Baelfire is the only herbicide we have. There are some cultural techniques that we can include with the Baelfire to help increase long-term control, whether it be the multi-year approach or if it's so bad that you have to completely renovate. In that case, I recommend you come back the following year after you've planted and apply a half rate of Baelfire, and it will look pretty good for the next few years. Just remember, we talked about cogon grass. You have to be persistent. It's kind of the same with smutgrass, although it's not as aggressive as cogon grass is. I think once you stop the management practice, it is going to come back pretty quickly, and that's the big take-home. So stay after it. If you see a little patch showing up in your pasture, it's better to get after it early. And if you are spot spraying, make sure you stay out from underneath your oak trees like this one. It can injure those pretty significantly. And apply it during the rainy season, July preferably. At least that's what my data is showing so far. And just follow it up. Stay after it. Let's try to keep it out as much as we can. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Anybody have any burning questions? Let me.
What results do you get with the wipe of that process?
His question is, what results do we get with the wiper when using Roundup or glyphosate? And honestly, I have not tested that. I know several people have used it, are pretty successful. The key to that is, regardless of the wiper type you're using, is that it has to be wiped in 2 directions. If you don't do that, you're not going to get satisfactory control. Another is, if you do it this time of year, you can see there's a bunch of hand grass growing up amongst the smut grass. It's not you're going to end up killing a lot of your Baelfire too. Okay? So we'll end up with more dog fennel than what that little plot has over there. Yes, sir?
Well, Brent, the glyphosate application also, you mentioned renovation of pasture. What success would I have to come in and round up and feel like that, burn off anything I can get to burn, then start tilling, because I'm going to be 60 days before I put seed back on.
Okay, his question is, when I completely renovated, he's saying what would happen if he applied a Roundup or glyphosate and killed everything and burned it off and then started tilling about 60 days before you planted? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I said completely renovated, and that's exactly what we did. We sprayed it with 4 quarts the acre of Roundup and then came back in and either burned it or not burned it and reseeded it after it's been tilled up significantly. So that's exactly what we did, and that's exactly the results I said is what we got.
You feel like you sterilize killing the seedlings without no seed started in the ground?
Do I feel like we're sterilizing any seed
Yeah.
if with the Baelfire, if we put it on the ground?
Yeah.
Okay, so the only way we're going to kill smutgrass seeds is if they're germinating once the Baelfire is put out. Otherwise, it's not going to sterilize any seed. It doesn't really happen with any herbicide program. Okay.
So probably what he's seeing is with the Baelfire out there, that seed tries to germinate, but does not because it kills the plant before we see it.
Right.
What's the longevity of Baelfire?
What is the longevity of Baelfire? I knew somebody was going to test my brain today. In Florida, it's not very long because of our sandy soils, because of the amount of rainfall we have. It doesn't last very long at all. I would say the maximum effect you would have, like, it's very dependent on the weather. I would say a maximum of 2 months of residual activity. And it's going to depend on the rate that's applied too. But I wouldn't rely on the residual activity so much as I would getting it out there to control what's there.
You know, I think the label, I looked at the label, it used to be on Baelfire. The label recommended August and early part of September. I believe that you may want to inform Dow or research.
I don't think the label says that anymore.
Okay. They may have changed.
Okay. Any other questions? I've ignored this side.
Fall, yeah.
Yes, sir?
Is Velosa a comparable product to Baelfire?
Is Velosa a comparable product to Baelfire? And yes, it is. Basically, if I understand it correctly, Velosa just has a surfactant package in with the product. And the use rate is a little bit different than Baelfire is, so that's something you need to pay attention to. And thank you for bringing that up. I forgot. I needed to say that. So there is another product called Velosa. It's very similar to Baelfire, but the use rates are a little bit different. And I don't remember those off the top of my head. I really can't say. I hate to misquote it. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah. As I understand what you just said, if you're doing a complete renovation, there's nothing out there that will wipe out the seed.
No, sir. There's nothing out there that will wipe out the seed. That's why I think the year after you plant the Bahia grass, that's why I think that the half rate application will help keep your smutgrass down. That's what I've seen in my plots, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. One more.
You're going to use Roundup, multiple applications. After you had done your initial tillage, Roundup, burn, till, and you say you did 2 more applications of anything, of Roundup on anything that emerged out there. How far apart would you need to be, and what do you think the results would be?
Okay.
You know, these other controls are awfully expensive.
I agree.
know, if you're gonna till something anyway, a little extra downtime, seem like maybe it would be worthwhile.
Okay, his question is kind of long, so I'm going to try to.
Oh, he wanders like everything I do.
I didn't mean that bad. Basically, what he's asking is if you round up the whole pasture, till it, let the weeds grow back, you get more smutgrass germinating, round up again, till it, let it grow back, round up again. What kind of results would I expect? I would expect some decrease in the amount of smutgrass that's there, but each time you till it, you bring more seeds to the soil surface, and you've got to think about how many seeds are out there. And it's just gonna, I mean, you're still gonna have smutgrass.
Well,